It had been years since my heart had felt light, since laughter had flowed freely through these walls. The silence in my home, once comforting, had settled too deeply, like dust on untouched photo frames. That changed the day my son Liam walked back through the front door, not just for a weekend visit but to stay for a while. My name is Dana, and I'm a woman shaped by years of quiet resilience. After my divorce a decade ago, I poured my energy into raising Liam alone. He was the kind of boy who made motherhood feel less like duty and more like a purpose. He grew up fast, too fast perhaps, flying off to college and then diving into work, leaving behind echoes of boyish laughter and the occasional note stuck to the fridge. So when I opened the door that Tuesday afternoon and found him standing there with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and that familiar sheepish smile, I didn't ask questions. I simply opened my arms. "Mom," he said, wrapping me in a hug that made me forget how long it had been since I last held him like that. "Thought I'd stick around for a bit. If that's okay." It was more than okay. The first week was filled with the joy of having someone to cook for again. I found myself humming while chopping vegetables, adding herbs with a kind of care I hadn't in years. Liam would sit at the kitchen counter telling me about work, life in the city, and the stress he was trying to shake off. "I just needed a break," he said one night over tea. "And honestly, I missed this. Us." His words made my heart twist. How often had I missed him too, in those quiet nights where I sat by the window, pretending the stillness was peace. At first, our days together were light and easy. Long walks, shared meals, old movies. I remembered how easy it had always been to talk to him. But something had changed, something subtle. Liam wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man with a quiet confidence in his voice, and eyes that saw more than they used to. There were moments, fleeting, strange, when I caught his gaze lingering on me. Not with discomfort but with something I couldn't quite name. Was it admiration? Was it concern? Or maybe just the way love changes when your child becomes an adult, when he sees you not just as a mother but as a woman. I dismissed it. Surely I was reading too much into things. Then one evening as we sat in the living room, him stretched out on the couch, me curled up with a blanket, we fell into a silence that felt different. Not heavy but intimate. The kind of quiet that wraps around two people who know each other too well. "I've missed this," he said softly. "Me too," I replied, surprised by the lump in my throat. He looked at me for a long moment. "You seem happier lately." I smiled, trying to brush it off. I think I forgot what it felt like to not be alone. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, just before we turned in for the night, he stopped by the kitchen, resting his hand gently on mine. Just a touch, nothing more. But it lingered in my skin long after he'd gone to bed. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind drifted through memories of his childhood, of the woman I used to be, of the ways life had weathered me. And now here he was again, breathing new life into a house that had grown too quiet. I told myself it was just gratitude, just the joy of being needed again. But a part of me, a whisper deep inside, knew it was more complicated than that. Here's part 2 of the story. Part 2, Shadows in the Familiar. The days settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and unfamiliar. Liam's presence in the house filled every room with warmth, and yet, there was a quiet tension I couldn't name. It wasn't unpleasant, just something unspoken, humming softly beneath our routines. I would wake early, make coffee the way I always did, and find him already in the kitchen, hair tousled, reading on his phone with that easy smile that always made me feel lighter. "You never used to be a morning person," I teased one day, setting down his favorite mug. "I guess I just needed a reason," he replied, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of the cup. There it was again, something in the way he looked at me. I felt it more and more, in the pauses between words, in the way his hand brushed my shoulder when he passed, in the way his voice softened when he asked how I was really doing. It unnerved me, and yet it didn't. I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself it was just closeness, the deep connection between a mother and son rekindled after time apart. Still, I found myself reaching for makeup in the mornings, fixing my hair a little more carefully. I caught myself smiling in the mirror, asking questions I didn't want to answer. One night the power went out. A storm had rolled in unexpectedly, and the house was plunged into a flickering hush of candlelight. "It's like we're camping," Liam said with a grin, setting candles on the coffee table as I brought out a blanket. We curled up together on the couch, shoulders touching, listening to the wind howling outside. "I used to hate storms," I murmured. "You always pretended not to," he said, his voice quiet. "But I remember how tightly you held me when the thunder got bad." I laughed, the memory warm and bittersweet. I guess I was pretending for both of us. The silence stretched between us, not awkward, just full. The kind of silence that comes when words feel too small. His hand found mine under the blanket. I didn't pull away. "I like being here," he said softly. "With you." I turned to him, our faces just inches apart in the dim light. His expression was unreadable, yet gentle, protective. But there was something else too, something that made my breath catch for a moment too long. I broke the gaze first, my heart thudding. "I'm glad you're here, Liam." And I meant it. Every word. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that look, that closeness, the warmth of his hand in mine. I replayed it again and again, searching for the boundaries I knew I wasn't supposed to cross even in thought. But I was no longer sure where those boundaries began or ended. Was it wrong to feel so alive again? In the days that followed, something shifted. Liam was still his easygoing self, still helping with chores, still asking me about my garden plans or whether I wanted to binge a new show. But there was a softness in our conversations now, a new awareness between us. And then, one afternoon while we were both folding laundry, he said something I hadn't expected. "Mom," he began carefully, "have you ever thought about starting over?" I glanced at him, surprised. "You mean dating? Maybe. Or just opening your heart again to something new?" I hesitated, folding a towel more slowly than necessary. "I've gotten used to things the way they are. But does that mean you're happy?" The question sat between us like a challenge, gentle but insistent. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think I've forgotten what that really feels like." He nodded, his voice even softer now. "You deserve to remember." Our eyes met again. There was so much he wasn't saying, and everything I didn't know how to say. That night, I found myself lying awake once more, the quiet hum of the house around me. But this time I wasn't thinking about the past. I was wondering about the future, and why, when I pictured it, Liam's presence was the only constant. I wasn't lonely anymore. But I also wasn't certain of what I was becoming. It started with little things. A glance held a breath too long. A brush of his fingers as we reached for the same coffee mug. The way his gaze would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that my loneliness had spun affection into something else. But I couldn't ignore how my heart fluttered at those moments, or how I started waiting for them. One evening after dinner, Liam suggested we sit on the porch. The summer heat had finally eased, and the sky was painted with streaks of lavender and gold. We brought out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, something I used to save for when friends visited. But tonight it felt right. He poured the wine, handed me a glass, and raised his in a soft toast. "To home." I smiled, touched by the simplicity of it. "To home." We sipped in silence, the cicadas buzzing gently in the trees around us. Liam sat close beside me, his knee brushing mine. His arm draped along the back of the bench. I felt it all. The contact, the warmth, the way his presence filled the space between us like sunlight seeping into shadows. "Do you remember when I used to sneak out here late at night?" he asked, smiling. I laughed. "You thought you were so clever. I used to watch you from the upstairs window." He grinned, leaning a little closer. "You never said anything. I figured you'd come back when you were ready." He tilted his head, studying me. "You've always known more than you let on." "Maybe," I said softly. Mothers know things. Even when they don't want to. There was a pause and then he asked, "Do you know how I feel now?" The question knocked the air from my lungs. I turned my head slowly, heart thudding. "What do you mean?" His gaze was steady but vulnerable. I don't know how to say it without it sounding wrong. Waited. "I think I've started seeing you. Not just as my mom, but as the woman who raised me, protected me, laughed with me, gave up parts of herself for me. And now that I'm grown, I see you. Really see you. And I don't know what to do with how I feel." The porch was still. The air, the trees, even the sky seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to run from the feeling blooming in my chest. And yet I didn't. Because deep down I'd felt something too. Something tender, something I couldn't name. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his voice thick. "I just needed you to know." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the boy I raised but the man he'd become. Strong, kind, and now raw with emotion I never expected to see in his eyes for me. Frightened me. And yet it filled a space inside me I'd long forgotten was empty. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. We sat like that until the sky went dark and the stars blinked awake above us. My heart beat loud in my ears, and still I said nothing. But I stayed. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house barefoot, feeling the cool tile beneath my feet, replaying Liam's words in my head. I stopped outside his door, hand hovering near the handle, not to open it, but to remind myself it was there. That he was there. The next morning he greeted me with a quiet smile, no questions, no pressure. Just presence. Steady. Respectful. But the air between us had shifted. I could feel it in the way he brushed my hair behind my ear as he passed in the kitchen. In the way he stood a little closer when we talked. It wasn't overt, it was a hum, a current, something deep and slow. We were both afraid of it. And yet we both leaned into it. That evening, as we cleaned up from dinner, he reached for the same dish I did. Our hands touched. Neither of us moved. I looked up at him, and his eyes searched mine. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," I breathed. "But not of you." He exhaled, stepping a little closer. "Then what?" "Of what this means. Of what people would say. Of what I might become if I let myself feel it." He gently cupped my cheek, his thumb tracing a line just beneath my eye. "You're already more than enough. Just as you are." I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch for the briefest moment. Was wrong. Was right. It was everything I didn't expect. And it was only the beginning. It happened in the quiet. Not in some grand declaration or dramatic moment, but in the hush that follows truth when it's spoken aloud. When nothing needs to be said, and everything has already been felt. After Liam touched my cheek, I didn't step away. I didn't pull back. I stood there, my heart fluttering like wind-tossed leaves, my breath caught somewhere between fear and surrender. His hand stayed, warm and steady, grounding me. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he whispered. "You're not," I said, so softly I wasn't sure he heard me. But he did. We stood in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us. The overhead light cast long shadows across the tiled floor, and I became painfully aware of every inch separating us. And of how much I wanted to close it. He took a small step forward and then paused, his eyes never leaving mine. "I keep thinking about that night on the porch," he murmured. "About what I said. About what I saw in your eyes." I swallowed, my throat tight. You weren't wrong. That admission cracked something open in both of us. It was like exhaling after holding our breath for too long. He leaned in slowly, as though giving me every second to say no, to turn away, to undo this moment before it crossed a line we couldn't uncross. But I didn't. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't rushed or reckless. It was tender. A whisper. Question and an answer all at once. My hands found his shoulders, unsure at first, but then steady as the kiss deepened. Not in urgency, but in meaning. It lasted only a moment. But in that moment everything else disappeared. The years of being strong, the labels I wore, the doubts and the rules and the noise of the world. All gone. Just us. When we parted, I didn't open my eyes right away. I was afraid of what I'd see. Of what he might see in me. But when I finally looked up, he was still there, close and calm. His eyes searching mine for regret. There was none. Only breathlessness. Only wonder. "We don't have to know what this is," he said, his voice low and steady. "We don't have to name it or explain it. I needed you to feel what I feel." "I do," I whispered. "I feel it." A long silence followed. But this one felt different, comforting. Like the kind of silence two people share when nothing needs to be fixed. When everything somehow makes sense, even if the world wouldn't understand it. Later that evening we sat in the living room, the lights dimmed, a blanket shared between us. The kiss wasn't mentioned again, but it lived in the quiet between our words, in the way our shoulders touched, in the way his hand found mine without a second thought. We watched the flicker of a movie neither of us was really following. I kept my gaze forward, but I felt him glance at me now and then, a small smile tugging at his lips. I could feel my heart stretching, like something long asleep had been stirred. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how to carry the weight of this thing between us. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. That night, when we both stood from the couch, the moment before saying goodnight felt like a question again. I turned to him at the base of the stairs, unsure if I should go first. Liam stepped close. His fingers brushed mine. "Sleep well," he said, with a softness that made my knees weaken. "You too." I walked upstairs with my heart still echoing the kiss. In the dark of my room, lying awake beneath the soft hush of moonlight, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel lost. Felt wanted. And that feeling wrapped itself around me like a warm, fragile truth.